And now let's just get started. So some of you may have seen these images on the meeting flyer. We asked if you knew what all of these things have in common. If you guessed that they all relate to the city's combined sewer system, you are correct. But if you didn't know that, or you don't know what a combined sewer system is, you will know by the time our presentation ends. Tonight, we're going to explain what a combined sewer system is, how it impacts the Conestoga River, what the city is doing to reduce our impact on the river, and what you can do to help keep our city and the river clean. At the end of our presentation, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback on what you've heard. So let's get started. I want to begin with a little geography. Lancaster was built along the Conestoga River. This map from the 1864 Lancaster City Plan shows the river in blue in the southeast corner of the city. The river, which starts near Morgantown, Pennsylvania, and ends at the Susquehanna River, is 62 miles long. It flows past farms and housing developments, past parks and communities like Lancaster and Millersville before it connects to the Susquehanna River. Lancaster is in the Conestoga River watershed, which drains an area of 475 square miles. That's almost half of Lancaster County. A watershed is an area of land that drains into a certain waterway. You might think of a watershed as a funnel that captures the water and drains it into a central point. I told you that the Conestoga River flows into the Susquehanna River, which ultimately flows into the Chesapeake Bay, making it part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Some of you have probably heard about the efforts to clean up the bay, an effort that has been going on for many years and will continue for many more. My point in telling you this is to demonstrate Lancaster's place in the region as it relates to these waterways, and that matters because we live downstream. We all want clean water, so we need to be mindful of how what we do affects others. Now, let's look at how Lancaster is connected to and impacts the Conestoga River. When it rains or snows, precipitation either soaks into the ground or runs off hard surfaces such as roofs, sidewalks, parking lots, and streets into storm drains like the one pictured here. In the areas at the edge of the city, rain enters storm drains that flow directly into waterways like the Little Conestoga River or Mill Creek. But in the middle of the city, the tan area shown on this map, we have what is called a combined sewer system. You might notice that this is the older part of the city. This combined sewer system includes 2,143 stormwater inlets, 89 miles of sewer pipe that flows by gravity, a little more than 4 miles of sewer pipes that convey sewage under pressure, 8 pump stations, and the city's advanced wastewater treatment plant. A combined sewer system collects and transports both domestic sewage and rainwater from the city's storm drains into a single system of pipes. This type of sewer system is common in historic cities like ours. Most of the time, the system works fine. Sewage and rainwater flow through the combined system to the city's advanced wastewater treatment facility, where it is treated before being discharged into the Conestoga River. However, there are times when the system becomes overwhelmed, resulting in what are called combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. A combined sewer overflow is when untreated wastewater flows directly into the Conestoga River. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Chris Volke-Hilditch to tell you more about combined sewer overflows. Chris?
Thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. There are 5 outfalls along the Conestoga River where combined sewage may be released into the river. Each outfall has a sign beside it alerting people to avoid contact with the water during and immediately following an overflow. We've also recently installed a light at each outfall. The lights will call attention to the sign and alert people to stay out of the water when there are CSO events. These lights are new and are not active yet. But now let's look at what's in the water. As you might guess, the primary pollutant of concern in combined sewage overflows is fecal coliform. Fecal coliform is a bacteria in human waste which can make people sick. This is the reason the city has posted signs, such as the one shown here, warning people to stay out of the water during and immediately following combined sewer overflows. In addition to fecal coliform, the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, the agencies that permit our wastewater treatment plant discharges, have determined that we must also consider biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD, and total suspended solids. BOD causes oxygen to drop, making it difficult for fish to survive. And total suspended solids, or sediment, can clog the river bottom and smother bugs, reducing food for fish. The city is obligated to monitor the discharges from the wastewater treatment plant and the combined sewer discharges so that we understand how these discharges are impacting the river. We have also been monitoring fecal coliform levels above the Conestoga water the Conestoga water plant since June of 2018. In addition, the U.S. Geological Survey and the Susquehanna River Basin Commission have been monitoring the condition of the Conestoga River for many years. It's important to note that a majority of the Conestoga River, which you'll recall stretches from Morgantown down to the Susquehanna River, has been declared impaired. This means that pollutant levels are too high to support recreation on the river, and it is not healthy for bugs and insects that live in the river and support a healthy fish population. Let's take a look now at how much pollution the city discharges to the river. This chart shows combined sewer overflow volume, the amount of sewage discharged in millions of gallons for each of the last 4 years, 2018 through 2019. It also shows the volume discharged in what we call a typical year. You'll see that the amount of untreated sewage and stormwater that flowed into the river ranged from a low of 450 million gallons in 2017 to a high of 1,190 million gallons in 2018, which was an extremely wet year. And the typical year volume is 580 million gallons. On average, less than 5 to 7% of the total system flow is released as combined sewer overflow. Can you guess the reason this varies? If you guessed rainfall, you're correct. Over the same 4 years, annual rainfall ranged from a low of 37 inches in 2017 to a high of 63 inches in 2018. And our typical year, based on historical records, is just below 40 inches. When we look at these together, you can see the connection between rainfall, shown on the line graph with the blue boxes, and combined sewer overflow volume, shown in the bars. The typical year numbers will help us plan for the future. These are the numbers the city will use to model how our system functions and project or forecast how different technologies, like green infrastructure, reduce combined sewer overflow entering the Conestoga River. Now let's take a closer look at 2018 so you can better understand the challenge we face in reducing the number and volume of combined sewer overflows. 2018 was an extremely wet year. But if we look at this slide, remember I said earlier, most of the time when it rains, the city's advanced wastewater treatment plant is able to handle all of the wastewater that flows through the city's combined system. However, there are times when the system becomes overwhelmed. On average, this occurs between 55 and 65 times a year. The city is committed to protecting the Conestoga River by reducing the number of times an overflow occurs and reducing the volume or the amount of sewage that is discharged annually. However, this work must be balanced with investment in the city's sewer infrastructure, including updating and replacing equipment at the treatment plant and maintaining our pump stations. I mentioned earlier that discharges from combined sewer systems are regulated by federal and state agencies. Because we have a combined system, our wastewater treatment plant permit requires us to develop and implement a 9 minimum controls plan. This is our basic program for reducing pollution from our combined sewer system. We also developed and are implementing a plan for installing green infrastructure throughout the city. And we must update our long-term plan for controlling combined sewer overflows, which was last updated in 2009. I'll tell you a little more about each of these now. Our 9 minimum control plan outlines things we can do now to reduce pollution from entering the sewer system and impacting the river. This includes things like collecting leaves in the fall and sweeping our streets, which prevents litter and other debris from washing into sewers through stormwater inlets. We have also installed screens at the combined sewer overflow outfalls. These screens catch leaves and debris that get into the stormwater inlets and prevents these materials from making their way into the river. Our Public Works Department must clean these screens regularly. We've also developed a program to address proper disposal of fats, oil, and grease, which can cause blockages in the sewer system. These blockages contribute to overflows during rain events and can lead to overflows during dry weather. The city will soon begin conducting inspections of restaurants and other commercial enterprises that generate these wastes to ensure that they are being disposed of properly. Another thing we are doing is using green infrastructure to reduce the volume of stormwater that enters the sewer system. Green infrastructure includes things like porous basketball courts, green alleys and parking lots, trees, rain gardens, and cisterns or rain barrels. Green infrastructure reduces the volume of stormwater entering the sewer system by allowing the water to soak into the ground, evaporate, or transpire. This in turn reduces overflows. Through the city's program, green infrastructure has been installed in more than 57 places in the city, and you can see some of them here. These completed projects are estimated to capture over 36 million gallons of stormwater during a typical year. Green infrastructure has other benefits too, what we call co-benefits. In addition to reducing the amount of stormwater that enters the system, green infrastructure improves air quality, provides habitat for birds, and helps cool the city. It also beautifies the city, improves psychological well-being, and increases property values. These are just a few of the many benefits of green infrastructure. So now let's go back to Steve to learn about the plan we've been developing, which will guide our future efforts.
Thank you. I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you again, Christine. While all of these actions are helping reduce overflows, we are being required to do more. In late 2017, the city entered into a consent decree with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. The consent decree requires the city to update our long-term plan for addressing combined sewer overflows in order to meet the requirements of the NPDES wastewater discharge permit. The consent decree sets a strict enforceable schedule for developing the plan, which we expect could take up to 3 years. The information we're going to present now will provide a foundation for your participation in the development of this plan, which we expect will require significant resources to implement. The city's commitments to strong neighborhoods, safe streets, secure incomes, and sound government will guide our work in developing this plan. We will be looking to the public for input and feedback as we seek solutions that offer the best water quality outcomes with the financial resources of the city and its residents. Now back to Chris to explain the planning process. Chris?
Thank you, Steve. This slide shows the 3 major steps involved in updating the city's plan for reducing CSOs. We recently completed a study of our combined sewer system, what is called the system characterization. This includes much of the information we presented earlier in the meeting, including how precipitation influences the number of CSO events and how the CSO discharges impact water quality in the Conestoga River. The next step in our planning process is to identify and evaluate the various ways we can cost effectively reduce the number and volume of CSOs. These are called control technologies. We begin with a high-level screening of all available control technologies to see which are technically feasible in Lancaster. The types of technology we will be screening include source control, such as green infrastructure, which reduces flows into the system. Collection system controls, such as pump station upgrades, sewer separation, stream daylighting, and inflow infiltration reduction. Storage, which involves using tanks to store excess stormwater until it can be processed at the wastewater plant. And treatment of discharges. Real-time controls, which involves activation of inline storage, that is storage in the portion of the pipe not used for conveyance, using devices such as weirs or pumps or gates. Implementation of real-time control devices can result in the temporary storage of combined sewage for later conveyance to the treatment plant. After screening out technologies that are not feasible in Lancaster, we will evaluate the technologies and approaches that warrant further consideration. At this point, we will begin developing cost estimates, and we will evaluate whether the controls will reduce the amount of sewer overflow. Finally, we will see which combination of these approaches might work best for Lancaster in terms of cost and affordability. The identification and evaluation of alternative control technologies is expected to take several months. The outcome of this will be a series of alternatives, which we will bring to you for your input at our second public meeting. After that meeting, we will begin to refine the CSO control alternatives and ultimately select the best control measures for Lancaster. I know I've presented a lot of information, and hopefully I did not bore you to tears, but sparked your interest. And now you're wondering what you can do to help. And for that, I'm going to turn you back to Steve. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chris. So, your questions and comments are welcome throughout the planning process. During public meetings, which we are holding online due to the COVID-19 restrictions, you can submit questions and comments in the Q&A box. We encourage you to visit the Engage Lancaster website to learn more about the project and submit questions or comments using the Post Your Idea button. You can also email your questions and comments to ltcpcomments@cityoflancasterpa.com or via regular mail. We have also assembled an advisory committee who will meet with city staff and our consultants to provide additional input and guidance throughout the planning process. We're very thankful to these folks, many of whom are with us tonight, for their commitment to this effort. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We ask that official comments be submitted through Engage Lancaster. You can also submit written comments to the city's Department of Public Works, attention LTCP comments. Public comments will appear in an online comment registry. Comments will show up as ideas or on the Engage Lancaster website. Assuming we have adequate contact information, anyone submitting written comment will receive verification that the comment was received. Your comments will be reviewed for incorporation into the plan as appropriate, and a comment response document will be included in the final CSO control plan. We are confident that with input from all of you, we can develop a plan that is right for Lancaster. Finally, here are some things you can do to help protect the river. Don't put fats, oil, or grease down your drain. This can clog the sewers and cause backups in your home or contribute to overflows from the system. Pick up litter or organize a litter cleanup in your neighborhood through the city's Love Your Block program, as the people from River's Edge Fellowship and others have done. Plant a tree or install a rain garden or cistern to reduce the amount of rain that enters the combined sewer system. And don't put motor oil or other debris, such as sidewalk or street sweepings, down the storm drains. And remember to move your vehicle on street sweeping day. I'll now open the floor for questions. Please use the Q&A button on your screen to submit your questions. If you have the same question as one that has come up before, use the thumb up feature to let us know. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can during the time we have left. However, we may not be able to answer all questions tonight. So, questions and responses will be included in a meeting summary and posted on Engage Lancaster. We encourage you to submit comments using the Post Your Idea button on Engage Lancaster. Any comments entered in the Q&A box tonight will be transferred to Engage Lancaster, which is our online comment registry. Mary, where should we begin?
Okay, let's see. We have several questions that have come in tonight. So let's begin with a question from Adam. Adam is asking how the typical year rainfall is calculated. Does it change in increased rainfalls if increased rainfalls continue to be observed year after year? From that, is it feasible for future rainfalls to be projected? Chris, I believe this is a question for you. However, I'll also say that our panelists have the option of saying they'd like to postpone response to that question if they feel like the response needs to be technically verified before we provide a response. So does either of you have a response to that question at this time?
I'm going to answer these questions very generally, and when we prepare the response to questions, we'll provide more detail in what I can cover this evening. So the typical year is calculated based on looking at historical information. Our typical year, when we looked at it, looks a lot like the rainfall that occurred in 1962. So you can see we've gone back many years to come up with that statistic. But the hydraulic modeling of the sewer is looking at the pipes, how big they are, how much they can carry. And then that model uses a rainfall generator input that can help us evaluate how much water would be generated when the rainfall hits the street. So as such, it is not a climate model where we can predict future rainfalls, but we can use the model to take that rainfall information, put it into storm flow, and then look at what our overflows would be. Dean's question deals with looking at population. One of the things that we look at is what our service area is. So depending on where the population increases, that translates into sewer flow. So as part of our analyses, we have worked with the contributing municipalities who come into the sewer system to look at what their future flows will be to calculate the future storage numbers. You're also asking about the impact on the city's infrastructure and what other municipalities are cost sharing. That really depends. We have intermunicipal agreements that deal with cost sharing for improvements in the treatment plant, but depending on what portion of a collection system those outside municipalities use, they would not be sharing in some of the long-term control plan costs because the combined sewer system is in the city. Okay. There's a question regarding what improvements are considered at the wastewater treatment plant to better handle the stormwater flow. The consent decree requires that we look at expanding the treatment plant to handle future flows, so that will be part of the alternatives analysis. A lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to get them in order, but okay. There's a question about water conservation. Would residents temporarily changing water usage, such as shorter showers and not running dishwashers or washing machines during heavy rainfall events, impact the amount of untreated water that is released into the Conestoga? Certainly water conservation helps. It helps people's water bill. They're not going to be paying as much for water. And that would help, but it's not something that the Department of Public Works could control. Someone asked, what is the fine amount during an overflow event? We are not fined for an overflow event, but the consent decree does have some fines if we violate our NPDES permit or if we have dry weather overflows.
Chris, this is Mary. Let me just interrupt here for 1 minute and just remind people to please use the Q&A for your questions, not the chat. The chat should be used for any technical issues that you're having. If you could please put your questions in the Q&A, use the Q&A button. Thank you.
Okay, there's a question regarding there should be a big focus on reducing impervious surface. For all new constructions, are there guidelines to be self-contained even in heavy rains? And yes, there are regulations about increasing the amount of stormwater in the city's ordinances.
Steve, how about the question about does the city offer to help residents install rain barrels? I think the city does have assistance through a partnership with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. There are grants that are available to help homeowners, and people can follow up through the Save It Lancaster website, I believe, to get assistance.
Oh, very good. I thank you very much for that. I think that is true. I will admit that I don't know the precise aspects of what is offered, but it is available on the website for people to reach out and find out more details about how we can partner with them. There's also another question here about whether when surface parking lots are redone, might they be the possibility to partner with property owners to excavate underneath the lot and install a gravel-filled dry well. These are possibilities generally where there are shared infrastructure, whether there's an easement where there's public infrastructure underneath, that might be a sharing opportunity, or it might actually be the responsibility of the city.
And I think we have time for one more question, and then we probably need to wrap it up to make sure that we end on time tonight. Apologies for the technical difficulties that may have cut our time a little short tonight. So Chris or Steve, do you see another question there that you want to tackle?
There's one on the amount of annual average amount of CSO discharge. What we can do in the response to questions is just provide some statistics of the last 5 years. We did not have a lot of detail on, the amount of CSO every year, but we can look at the last 5 years and just post that to show, how rainfall affects that amount of wastewater.
Well, I'm very encouraged by the numbers and the types of questions that are being asked. I'm also looking forward in the future to there being more questions from people who not only have some technical expertise in these arenas so that we can push the envelope, but I'm especially interested in the questions from people who are not necessarily familiar with our infrastructure and are becoming acquainted as we move forward in this process. It's very important to all of us that we are fully engaged as we move forward because this will impact what we can afford to build and how well we can meet the requirements of the consent decree. So I want to thank you for your questions, but before we wrap up, I want to tell you what's next. Once we complete the technology screening and before we begin evaluating the controls that are feasible in Lancaster, we will host another public meeting. At that time, we will share more information and get your feedback on the criteria we will use to evaluate alternatives. In the meantime, I encourage you to sign up on our new participation platform to receive project updates and notices of future meetings and review project materials. Finally, we encourage you to share what you learned today with your friends, neighbors, and colleagues. We need your input as we select the best approach for Lancaster within the limits of our resources. Thank you all again for attending tonight, and we look forward to your participation in the future.